was born in Damariscotta, attended Lincoln Academy and Bowdoin College, and he married Jean Stetson of Newcastle. And as I said, he has run Strong Chevrolet for 42 years. And they will talk to you, Bob and Rufus.
Thank you, Mildred. All right if I start this off?
Please do.
Okay. Well, Rufus and I have given this talk a number of times to a few other organizations. And it isn't a lecture. It's kind of a chat. And it isn't going to be historically perfect. But it's more like what it was like to grow up in Damariscotta, and the experiences that we had growing up and being around Damariscotta 50 or 60 years ago. It isn't ancient history. It's, at least not to me, 50 or 60 years like yesterday. But the talk that we have previously given started, we took people on a walk from the Congregational Church in Newcastle across the bridge into Damariscotta and up to the Baptist Church. Well, we're here today to celebrate Damariscotta sesquicentennial, so we're going to leave Newcastle out of it. We're going to start at the bridge. And we're going to take you on a walk from the bridge through the main street of Damariscotta and tell you some of the things that we experienced and what it was like when we were younger, and show you some of the changes in the buildings and in the ownership of the businesses, etc. So perhaps, Ruth, you could give them a bit of background of our little talk.
Well, Bob, I think one of the features that I always like to bring out about Damariscotta is how it has changed, but it hasn't changed. It has remained the same in one particular, and that is the succession within families of various businesses and professions. And we could start right at the bridge in Damariscotta with Page's Marble and Granite Works, which was right there on the left-hand side as you're coming into Damariscotta. That business went through 5 generations of Pages, and I knew at least 3 of them, and I don't know if you knew any more than 3. But that was just one of the businesses in Damariscotta that passed through many generations. Another is Lincoln County News, which is now in its 4th generation, having gone from father to daughter to son, and then to another son. The Yellowfront Grocery, 3 generations. Gilbert Gay and Son. All of you may remember Spencer Gay was Gilbert's son. Ethel's Dress Shop went from mother to daughter, from Ethel Dickinson to June Tookie. Reed's Department Store, first Howard and then his son David. John Glidden Insurance Agency, John and then Jack. Then there's the Waltz Pharmacy, which is still in business and celebrating their 50th year this August. And Waltz Pharmacy started with Pearlie Waltz, and later through his daughter Joanne Jacobs, and now I guess David is the pharmacist there. Then there was Clark Spa, started by Bill Clark and later taken over by his son Bill Jr. Vanna's Meat Market, I think, was run by Chester and later by Gordon. Is that right, Walter?
I believe so.
Yeah,
Most
all
of
right.
it.
Incidentally, anybody in the audience who finds us making a mistake or can add to this history is welcome to chime in. And we're used to being corrected, so we don't mind about that.
Yes, we would appreciate it if you'd verify the things we say, but don't dispute them.
Yeah. Of course, I should mention Strong Chevrolet, which was in business for 43 years under one owner and is now in its second generation with Betsy Strong now operating Strong Chevrolet. Then we go to the professions. There was Dr. Edwin Stetson and then later his son Rufus, not me. There was Robert Belknap, Dr. Robert Belknap and his son Sam. Of the dental profession, there was Ralph Griffin and his son Joseph. In the legal profession, there was Ralph Gallagher and his son Jim. Even in the banking profession, the First National Bank was once headed by Wilder Dodge and subsequently by his son Leon. So you can see that the business community in Damariscotta hasn't changed a bit. It stayed right in the same families right on down through the years. Bob?
Very good. Good summary. Well, I want to talk a bit about our extensive collection of slides.
Oh, that would be great.
And I don't know why I haven't turned this on already. We usually have a professional operator with us, but today she had to be absent. And this extensive collection that I talk about is now way up to around 11 slides. But we can get plenty of mileage out of 11 slides because we can talk and get, you'll have to shut us off. But here we go at the bridge. All right, this is a picture of what we call the Iron Bridge. And that's the way the bridge looked when I was a boy in Roof 2. And how's that for focus?
Pretty good.
Okay.
Good.
Okay, we're looking towards Newcastle. And the Rufus had just spoken about Page's marble and granite work, which would be on the right next to the bridge, and coming back this way you can see where there was a barber shop. That's where Nick Carter had a barber shop, and then the Central Maine Power Building, and then on to the left of the bridge is the store of now where the Adams Travel Agency is, but that was Mabel Cotter's Sunday paper store. And at one time, I think perhaps it might have been in the late 40s, George Chassie was in that building with a Maytag franchise and service store. And then next to it, where coming this way, where you see that tide hall sign, there was a filling station, and that was run by, I believe, Ski Huntley for a while, and then later, Steve Crooker. I remember when I was a boy, Steve Crooker had that station. And just this side of where that automobile is shown is the road that goes down to Schooner Wharf. And as you went down that road, it was a very narrow road. There was, when I was a boy, the wharf was there, but there was no commercial business on the wharf at that time. There was a fish market. Just as you go into that road, and before you come to the wharf, there was a fish market that was run by Frank Clifford. And then you went down onto the wharf, and there was no business there. Ruth, did
Well,
you?
before that, there was a sail loft,
Yeah,
which was run by Wallace Williams and his wife
yeah.
as a summer business, and I guess they handled antiques. One thing about that wharf, I remember when they put a boat ramp, a boat launching ramp, built it right into the wharf. It's no longer there, but I think it was the first boat launching ramp in the state of Maine. It was back in the early 30s when that was put in there. And that was it didn't have any lift or anything like that. People used to slide their boats right down that wooden ramp into the water.
I remember that ramp, and it was the first one I'd ever seen. It was cut in and built into the wharf entirely out of wood. And when the tide would come up, it would lubricate the ways, and the boats would slide in and out easily. There was no such thing as a boat trailer in those days. People would bring a skiff or a wooden skiff in there on the back of a truck, and they would just physically manhandle it off the truck, put it down onto that launching ramp, and the wet wood would take it from there.
Right.
But it was quite a piece of beautiful carpentry.
It was a
Yeah.
thing of beauty. Now you notice those parking meters. Damariscotta had parking meters for about, Walter, what was that, about 15 years?
We still have them too, up in the attic.
Well, yes. Our selectman is right here, and I hope you all tell him not to put those meters back on the street.
Someone's offered to buy them off us, so I don't know if they're gonna sell them or not.
Yeah. Well,
One thing, Rupert, one might mention is that in connection with the Iron Bridge, the kids would go swimming down at the wharf. That was a great place to swim. They'd come running up to the street from that and go out and get up on the railing on the south side of that bridge, and then jump off the railing down into the water and float down with the current down to the wharf, and then climb up the ladder and go through it all again. But Rufus lived close by there. You even floated up the other way at
well, of
times.
course, you'd have to go upstream in order to get around the point to my grandmother's home there.
Before we go off that slide, is there something, does Charlie Giles have a sign right there?
No.
No, okay.
That was where the Central Maine Power Company store was, and of course that was put in there by Central Maine when they first came out with electric washing machines and other appliances. It helped to generate business for Central Maine Power. So they sold all the appliances they could, got people to get rid of their wood stoves and get electric stoves. Power was cheap in those days.
Yes, you could even pay your bill.
Yeah.
Okay, well now, here's quite a picture. This is you can see the Iron Bridge is roughly the same period of time, but now you got an airplane crash right here. Now, where else can you go in America and have an airplane crash right on the main street? That really created a lot of excitement.
Nobody got hurt either.
No, I remember that day very well. I couldn't believe my ears when somebody said an airplane just crashed down on Main Street. Everybody in town rushed down there to see it. And this fellow had been flying his floatplane, and by the way, I believe that he was related to the Freeman family by marriage or something. Do you know,
Yeah,
you know
he
that?
was, I believe, may have been a son-in-law of Ed Freeman, who of course was the owner of Round Top Farms. And he used to have a pilot fly him up to Maine from New York during the summertime. And you can see the end of the float sticking out under the left wing of the plane there. And that's what caught on the wires there by the bridge when he tried to fly up over the bridge. And he caught one of those wires, and that spun him right into the top of Page's Marble and Granite Works. The picture was taken from the bedroom window in my family's house there on Main Street.
It was incredible that anybody could survive that crash, but that fellow walked away from it with just a broken shoulder, I believe. But believe me, that was in a hot summer's day, and the town was very busy, and everybody was some excited about it. Now, that's a better picture of the Iron Bridge than the first one I showed you. Rufus, did you want to say something about the Newcastle side on that?
Well, I'd like to point out the Episcopal Rectory in the background on the right there. And that's where the convenience store is now. That was St. Andrew's Rectory, which incidentally at one point had been the Newcastle Bank and later became the parish house, not the rectory, the parish house for St. Andrew's Church. That's where I went to Sunday school, and Miss Grundy and Mrs. Lee were the Sunday school teachers, and the Belknap children and the Stetson children and a few others, the Richards children, were there at that Sunday school, the Knowlton girls, and I can remember very well singing All Things Bright and Beautiful, and I haven't liked that hymn ever since.
What's that sign say?
Well, we'll come to that later, Bob,
Okay.
but that's when the Newcastle Bank moved down the street, down to Damariscotta.
Okay. Now, this is in the early 50s, I think it was maybe 1952 or 53, when they took down the Iron Bridge and replaced it with the bridge that we now have.
Which incidentally is the fifth bridge across the river. Before the first bridge, there was a ferry, and a toll ferry. But then back in the 1780 or so, I guess it was, that they built a bridge, and the present bridge is the fifth bridge. Go ahead, Bob.
The bridge is such an important part of Damariscotta or Newcastle that another name for Damariscotta was the bridge. People called the bridge. They didn't call it Damariscotta. And you can see they've taken out the Iron Bridge. They're getting ready to put in the new one, and they made a temporary bridge that went from Page's Marble and Granite Works, which we're looking at right there on the left-hand side. The temporary bridge was a wooden thing that came across the river and went ashore by the Episcopal Church and back onto Route 1. And while that new bridge was under construction, that also was in the summer, and there was a lot of heavy traffic that year. And that was the scene of a terrible accident. Someone was crossing that temporary bridge, and I don't know what happened, but their car went over the side and down into the water. There were 3 people in it. I believe 2 survived the accident, but 1 was killed. Let's see now, looking back, Rufus, is the Narragansett leather, is that visible?
Well, yes, right behind that crane, you'll see a big building there, it looks like a barn, but that was the old Metcalf livery stables, and where Narragansett leather and the fish market is now.
In the Narragansett leather store, businesses that I remember being there. There were a couple of restaurants that occupied, as you face the Narragansett Leather store, as you face it, it would be on the right-hand side. There was a restaurant there called Park's Restaurant. I don't know who Park was or what his last name was, but he had a restaurant there for a little while. And then after that, there was another restaurant that came, and it was owned by a person from Wiscasset named Eaton, who also owned the property where they built Maine Yankee. Mr. Eaton ran a restaurant there for a few years. And on the left-hand side, as you face the Narragansett Leather Building, Ralph Cheney had a furniture store. And his daughter and her husband later started the Come Again shop in that location. Before we go too far up Main Street, I want to say something about going down to the wharf to watch some of the launchings of ships that were made at Mars Shipyard. And Mars Shipyard was located behind what is now Colby and Gale's filling station. There's a parking lot, of course, is out there now, but back in these days, there was nothing but water. But Mars Shipyard was on the edge of that, and Harry Marr built some minesweepers made of wood for just about the time World War II started until, well, I can't remember how long was Harry Marr Shipyard there?
Probably until the late 40s, Walter, is that about right?
Oh, yes, I would say so, yeah.
Yeah.
So the war was well over.
Yeah.
Besides the, is Dorothy Chapman right there?
No, Walter's there.
Walter.
He's almost as good an authority as Dorothy.
Well, Dorothy could certainly tell us because Harry Marr was Dorothy's father.
Okay.
Yeah. But besides the minesweepers, wooden minesweepers, which incidentally were very highly regarded by everyone.
The U.S. Navy
The U.S. Navy included, that was knowledgeable about boats. They were highly regarded. Besides the wooden minesweepers, one of the most noteworthy ships that Harry built was the Sunbeam, which was used as a missionary vessel along the coast of Maine. And Edward Rowe Snow was one of the famous clergymen that went aboard the Sunbeam. And incidentally, I think that the Sunbeam, in one form or another, the Sunbeam 5, I think it is still running right now.
They service the islands off the coast of Maine, providing missionary services and making sure that the spiritual well-being of the islanders is taken care of.
One of the previous speakers this morning that talked about launching big vessels in the Damariscotta area mentioned how important it was to have the right angle when the ship slid into the water, how important that was. Well, one day I can remember going to a launching down there, and I went down onto the wharf with a whole lot of other kids, the schooner wharf, and we were watching the ship being launched across this little bay of water. And when the ship came down the ways, it got stuck in the mud. Well, that just delighted all the kids. We just were tickled to death with that. And Harry Marr had to get long ropes and give them to the people over on the schooner landing wharf. And the tide kept coming, and when it got to the right height, we all gave it a good pull and came loose, and they were able to take it on down the river. But I remember going to a great many launchings there, not a great many, 4 or 5. And they would launch them sometimes in the winter, and they would have to have the Coast Guard send the ice cutters up the river and crush the ice, make a channel to get the boats downriver and on their way. Okay, on the left-hand side, beyond pages Marlin Redwood, I think, Rufus, I can see the top of your house.
Yeah, that was my grandfather's house, and later my dad and mother lived there.
Right, okay, well, we're going to get, here's a beautiful picture of the main street of Damariscotta that's taken in front. The photographer must have been standing very close to your house.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
looking up towards the Baptist church, and I think the date on that one is the winter of either 1946 or 47. And it shows you a very, well, peaceful Damariscotta on a winter evening. It's a beautiful photograph.
well, I'd like to mention that under the Tidal sign there, you'll see the Greyhound bus station. The Greyhound bus used to come through Damariscotta, and that was where they would stop there, right there by the, what is now the Narragansett Leather and the Fish Market, in the old Will Metcalf livery stable. And just beyond that is the Riverview Restaurant.
Yes, the Riverview Restaurant. I have a better picture of that, but just roughly, before I change this picture, there's the Narragansett Leather Store, then the Riverview Restaurant, then Will Stetson's, and then the Masonic Block, the brick building that you see there on that side, and then on this side, on the left-hand side, well, I can't see it very good, but I guess the Cockrell House, and can you see anything?
You can't see the house there, but that's the Charlie Giles law office that was in there. I think that was after the Central Maine Power.
Yeah, well, does that say Charlie Giles?
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting because we've got an older picture as taken in that same location that says Judge Singer. And Charlie Giles occupied his office.
Yeah.
A lot of cars for a winter's night.
Why so many at night? I
Well,
have never
that's,
seen-
we talked about that, and either Rufus's family were having a party, or I think it might have been a meeting night for the Masons. The Masons met on the 3rd floor of the Masonic Block.
We'll come to that in a minute.
Yeah. Now, Ruth, there you go.
Well, I think we ought to, now this was just before Bob and I came on the scene. Well, that automobile was one of the first automobiles in Damariscotta. And Bob's wife, Jean, is a cousin of mine. So Bob and I are cousins-in-law. And Jean's father drove the first automobile in Damariscotta, and we think that's Cousin Arthur at the wheel of that automobile. And nobody has disputed that, so that's what we claim.
We've made that claim so many times that please, no one dispute it.
What kind of an automobile is it?
The make of automobile, that's the old Willys.
I see.
I think it's a Buick. But we just spoke a moment ago about the sign on the law office of Charlie Giles. Well, now there is Judge Singer himself.
It looks like him.
I believe it is. Sitting there, or standing, yeah. And Rufus, that is your
That's the
home
old
right there.
Cottrell house, which my grandfather bought when my dad was just a boy. And then later on in 41, Mother and Dad moved back into what was his father's and mother's house. I used to mow that lawn, and that was a tough job. I get 50 cents. My grandmother paid me a very fair wage for doing that. But that was a tough lawn to mow.
Just beyond your to Neil Parsons' home, which now has been turned around sideways and was a restaurant in
But
there. And then you go up into the business blocks.
those beautiful elm trees were there when we were growing up. And in the Austin block was where Judge Gallagher had his office. That's Jim Gallagher's father. He was municipal court judge as well as a distinguished lawyer here in town. There's another good view of the Riverview
Okay,
restaurant.
this is a good view of the Riverview restaurant. There was an article in this week's Lincoln County News, I think, about Annie O'Brien Jacobs, that was the proprietor of the Riverview restaurant. And a number of times that Rufus and I have spoken about the main street of Damariscotta, we always noted what a meaningful business person Mrs. Jacobs was and how visionary she was. And a woman entrepreneur. She had the Riverview restaurant was very well known all over, certainly New England and beyond. People knew about the reputation that it had.
Probably beyond the Atlantic Ocean.
Maybe so. But the amazing thing about these pictures that I'm not able to show you with this is that the water, those buildings there are all on pilings. Even the Masonic block was on pilings. It's incredible. The water came right up almost to the sidewalk. You could walk along there and look down between those buildings and there was the water. Imagine the weight that 3.5-story brick Masonic block was putting onto pilings that were down in the mud. I'm surprised that the place is still there. But,
How do they fill it in after?
well, they filled it in by just bringing in trucks and bulldozers and making the parking lot and pushing it under those buildings.
Yes, we better move again.
Okay.
No rushing.
Okay. Okay, now, here we are at that's the Masonic block. You're looking at it right from the front. And that's the one I was telling you about. The back end of that was all on pilings. And on the left-hand side was Mrs. Marr's store, candy store. My wife, Jean, worked there when she was a young girl. And then there's the entrance in the center, and then on the right is Hall's Shoe Store.
Now,
To the right of that was Will Stetson's grocery store.
well, now that center entrance there, it says Healy's Photo Shop. Well, Mr. Healy took over from David Lindsay. Lindsay's Photo Shop is where most of these slides originated. Dave Lindsay took most of these old pictures and preserved them for history. Up on the third floor were the Masonic rooms, the lodge, and Walter, I think I met you up there back around 1942. You were master of the lodge then.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised.
43.
There, and I remember,
That was a couple of years back.
yeah, it was good.
All right, now we'll go across the street from that brick block, the Masonic building, and this is a picture of Vanna's Market and Neil Parsons' house. This house of Dr. Parsons was the one I was telling you that had been turned halfway around, and the Mainway restaurant is on the Salt Bay restaurant. And Chester Vanna had a grocery market, right, that you're looking at on the left, and then to the left of that is the Austin block where Ralph Gallagher was practicing law. And if you follow that street out through, you'd come to a filling station that was being operated by Arthur House. And then later out in that area behind Dr. Parsons' house, there was a diner that operated for quite a few years, a restaurant, diner. And when I was a young boy, Neil Parsons lived in this house and practiced medicine from an office in this building. And in that barn, out back of that barn, he had built a cage as well. It was twice as big as this table and twice as high. And in that cage, he used to keep a monkey. And it was pretty nice to have a circus monkey available anytime you wanted to go look at it. And the kids in the area really appreciated that. But he had to take that monkey to New York in the wintertime. It was a little too cool for him down here. And I think that one evening when we were talking about that, Patsy Fales was in the audience, and she was the youngest of the three sisters that were there at the time I was a young man, and she told us about the animals and the monkey's name, and it was very interesting. Now, Ruth,
That's a Lincoln County Motors, but it used to be the old Bath Garage, which you see there, it's a Dodge Plymouth agency, but when it was a Bath Garage, it was the Ford agency. And those are modern gas pumps out in front. Those are electrically operated. When it was the old Bath Garage, they had hand-operated gas pumps, where you would crank the gas up into a glass globe, and you'd fill up the glass container above the crank, and then you turn a valve and let the gas go into the tank. That way people knew that they were getting exactly 5 gallons with every turn of that valve. And then you'd fill it up again, and that would be 10 gallons. And I can remember actually pumping gas in that fashion for the Bath Garage Company. It became the Lincoln County Motors in about let's say 40, around 1940, when Chester Layton and Phil Corey took it over. And they ran it until the building burned, and that was one of the big fires in Damariscotta. We'll get to that.
yeah, that I might mention to give you an idea of the wage scale back then. When that place burned, they tried to salvage the bricks. It was just a pile of rubble and bricks, but they wanted to save as many bricks as they could, and they had to be cleaned, and the mortar had to be taken off, and all the dirt had to be taken off the bricks. So they hired the kids to do that, and they paid them 10 cents a hundred. Now, you could make way up to around a nickel for a whole day's work there. But,
And you were one of those kids.
well, I gave up. I didn't have the patience. There. That's what the First National Bank looked like in its Main Street days. Ruth, maybe you could tell us.
Well, of course, that concrete facade was put there when the bank took over the building from the old Maine Hotel. And to the right of the bank is the Damariscotta Post Office, where the photo shop is now. When the bank moved up the street and across the street, that old facade was taken off, and Ed Freeman redid the bank building there and restored it to the same appearance as it had been when it was the old Maine Hotel. And he did the same thing for the Masonic building when he restored that front too.
Yes, over there, the post office was on the far right, on the first floor. Earl Woodbury was the postmaster, and then the office above that was where Dr. Griffin was, Joe Griffin's father, and then later occupied by George Nevins, who was in there for quite a while. And then there was the law office of an old Bowdoin grad, Wes Hilton.
Right? Wes and Emerson Hilton
Right.
had their law offices.
And then there were apartments, and way over on the left-hand side, on the second floor, was a barber shop. And my dad was a barber in that shop for a while. And I'll take a chance and tell this story and hope that these people haven't heard it a dozen times. But one of the funny things that my dad used to tell about happening in the barbershop happened there. He was in the shop with two other barbers. One was Jim Barnes from Damariscotta Mills, and the other guy was Dan Urquhart from Newcastle. And there was a customer that none of them really cared to accommodate, because the fellow was constantly finding fault with everything they did, and the price was wrong and everything was bad. And one day this fellow came in, and it was Jim Barnes' turn to take the next customer. So Jim showed him the greatest attention, and he was very polite to him. And the fellow wanted a shave, so Jim put him down in the chair and put the apron up and put the hot towels around the fellow's face and tipped him back in his chair. And then Jim went over, put his hat and coat on, went home to lunch. So that's one way to get rid of an unpopular customer. That fellow never came back again.
Well, now we come back the street a little bit. To the left is the fence in front of Neil Parsons' house, and you'll see Lincoln County Hardware. Well, that used to be Wilder Dodge's clothing store when we were real young. Next to that is a store, I think that was Harry, I don't know, that was Harry Clifford's hardware store. Next to that, the Rexall Drugs, which was a Smithwick drugstore. And Reggie Martin was the proprietor of Smithwick's Rexall store. I used to go in there to get ice cream, sodas, and I'd get an extra squirt of chocolate if Reggie Martin wasn't there, and the boy behind the counter would help us, giving us an extra helping of chocolate. And that boy was Lynn Palmer. This is back around 1938, 39. And next to that is the First National store. And I worked there in the summertime when Cliff Cate was a manager and Everett Morse ran the produce end of it. And that was a very thriving chain store, one of the few chain stores in town. Beyond it, we'll talk about that later, the AMP. Next to the First National is Poland's drugstore, and they had pretty good ice cream sundaes in there. But I think the best ice cream sundaes were at Clark's Spa. We'll come to that later.
Before we leave that picture, I remember the Lincoln County Hardware being in this end of it, and then later Damariscotta Hardware, and then a very bad fire came and destroyed that building. And on the street level, beside the Damariscotta Hardware, was Clarence Bates, had a jewelry store right there. And on the second floor was another dentist, Dr. Williams, and then also Fred Kopp, had a shoe repair store in that building. Then next to that was Reggie Martin's, and then the First National, and Poland's, then the A&P, where Bill Jellison was the manager, and above that John Glidden had his insurance agency. But between where, let's see, it would be where John Chapman is now, it must have been after the First National went out.
Yeah.
Dick Wheeler,
Yeah.
Bobby Wheeler's father, had an appliance store in there. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then, incidentally, just to the left of the Rexall drugstore, at one point in Damariscotta history was the Green Front, namely the state liquor store. And Damariscotta had been dry for many years. I say dry, they didn't, we had local option, and Damariscotta never approved of a liquor store. We did have a tavern, the Lincoln Tavern, which was out in back of the main street, and that was a beer hall. Joe David used to run that, and that was a respectable establishment, but there wasn't any liquor in town, I don't believe. If there was, it was probably brought in by bootleggers.
Now, how are we doing for time?
We're using up a lot
Using
of...
up a lot. Mildred, have we got time to go another store or two up the street? We'll go one or two more stores. Okay, now we're looking back from the A&P store, where now Rennie is. See, on the right-hand side, that is was the A&P. It's now where Bob Rennie has his store. When we're looking back down the street, you can see the beautiful elm trees.
Notice the parking there. It wasn't what we call parallel parking. It was, what do you call that? Head-in parking.
Yes.
Imagine what that would be like backing into traffic today.
Okay. This is a picture of Clark's Spa.
What's a
And
spa?
it's now the pub. Is it in focus?
Yeah, that's pretty good. Went by.
Okay. Oh, it's went by it? Well, I wanted to say something about that because my mother and Bill Clark were cousins, and they started that store together in 1935. And then later, my mother went into another business, and Bill had it by himself for a great many years. And then young Bill had it right up until he sold it to people who now run it as the pub. But what we're looking at now must have been in the 40s, I would say. And Ed Tukey had a beauty parlor above the store. I think you can see his sign. Now, when I was going to high school, Bill Clark's store was kind of the center of social life for the high school crowd. And we couldn't wait to get out of school and go rushing down to Bill's, where he had every kind of Coca-Cola that you would mix on the spot, and you could buy cigarettes for 10 cents a pack, which we used to do that very frequently. And we thought it was the grandest place, and we just loved going there. in the back room of Bill's, he had 2 jukeboxes. And we used to love to play those jukeboxes so much that we would put our own records on there and then pay to listen to them. But I have a great many fond memories of incidents at Bill's, and it was a great place for teenagers.
Take a minute, Bob, to tell about that staircase on the left going up to John Glidden's office.
There was that staircase, you can see it there, was kind of a challenge to the kids. And it used to bother John Glidden something terrible, because the kids would get out there and they would see how many or how few steps they could make to get to the bottom of it.
They'd start
at the top and they'd reach way down like this and then swing down. And some of them that were really athletic could make that whole sweep in one step. And others ended up at what was now known then as the Lincoln Hospital, which was up didn't have an emergency room, but they managed.
Then on the right-hand edge of the picture, you'll see the steps going up to Strong's Barber Shop.
Well, I don't think it was Strong's Barber Shop. I don't know what the name of it was. It was just Barber Shop.
Well, all right.
But that had steps similar to that.
Was Linwood Layton in the...
Well, Linwood Layton bought it after my dad and the other 2 got out.
Where was Charlie Sherman?
Charlie Sherman's was across the street. Charlie Sherman and
Marl Smith.
Marl Smith were on the first floor beside where David Belknap's hardware store is.
Okay, but
Oh, wait a minute. One more thing. When you went up those stairs to go to John Glidden's office, there was another office across from his that was a watch repair for Ralph McKinney. Do you remember
that's right,
Ralph?
Ralph McKinney.
Ralph McKinney. And then up the street was an automobile agency, and at one time, I think Harry Marr owned that at one time, and I remember them selling Kaisers and Fraziers. Now there's a car that if you had a new one now, you'd be wealthy beyond your wildest dreams. They're such a rarity.
Right.
Yeah.
Almost as rare as Edsel.
Yeah. Okay. The one thing I want to mention before we get through with this talk is the terrible fire that they had in Damariscotta in 1943. It really changed the looks of the main street. And this gives you an idea what it looked like just before that fire. You can see the Ross building on the right is where Robert Belknap had his office, and then the Skidumphil Library, Lincoln Block. Then across there was an open lot where Jim Gallagher's building is and where Rennie's and Waltz's pharmacy is was a vacant lot. It was a field. It went right down to the water. There was no building there. The first building was Murray Center's department store. Now, coming up this way towards Water Street, see, coming up the main street, you went past that open field, and then you came to a frame home that belonged to Mrs. Alma Hall, who was the organist at the Baptist Church. Then you came to the corner where the Lincoln County News was in a 3-story brick building. Well, one day in the summer of 1943, they had a terrible fire in Damariscotta. On Water Street, well, that's what's left of the Lincoln County News building after the fire. That was right on the corner where Guy Lane has the filling station right now. A fire got started around noontime on, I think it was an August day in 1943. It was a windy afternoon. And Weeks and Walt's Ford garage was on Water Street. And the fire started behind their garage. Well, the wind and whatever got that fire whipped into a frenzy in no time. And before the afternoon was over, the Weeks and Walt's garage had burned totally flat. The Lincoln County News burned flat. Mrs. Hall's house, Dan Bisbee's house, which was across the street, Captain Post's house, the Fisk house, the Baptist Church steeple, and a house on Bristol Road, where Joe Bartlett lives now. Well, 5 of them were totally flat, and the others were badly damaged. It was a fire that's beyond belief. It scared everyone to death, and they had to have the fire companies come to Damariscotta all the way from Bath to Rockland. And then it was just a miracle that they were able to put it out. It could have been much, much worse than it was. It was bad enough. But luckily, it was stopped with 8 badly damaged houses, 5 completely demolished. And it changed the looks of the main street of Damariscotta. Now that's a picture of the Fisk house before the fire. The Fisk house,
That's where the First National Bank is
National
today.
Bank is now. It was a very well-known inn back in the 20s and 30s, and it was very popular. And then it changed hands, and the American Legion Post, the Wells Hussey Post, bought the Fisk house and had the Legion Hall there. And then later, the American Legion, the Wells Hussey Post, ran it as a recreation center for teenagers in Damariscotta. Then after that, First National Bank bought it.
Well, the main building was a private residence. I think the man's name was Dwight Fisk, who owned it. And it was bought by the proprietors of the old Maine Hotel, which is, we saw earlier, that's where the First National Bank used to be, was the Maine Hotel. So when the Maine Hotel closed its doors, the proprietors opened up the Fisk House. And that was almost as famous up and down the coast as the Riverview Restaurant.
Ruth, I think we better...
Well, let's go one or two
one
more.
or two
because
Did
more.
the
All right.
soldiers live in that Fisk house?
The what?
The soldiers?
Yeah, the
Both
soldiers
of
were
my
there.
brother-in-laws, that's where my 2 sisters got their husbands from them.
Yeah, right. The soldiers were there the day that fire came. They were right. They were on a patrol, and they weren't in that premise right at that
They used to lie
time.
down around Ocean Point where
Yeah.
I lived, and that's where my
That's
sisters
right.
met.
That's right. This isn't on the main street, but it's the entrance to the Miles Memorial Hospital. And that's the way it looked when the Walker family had it as a private home. That was an estate-like home where Miles Memorial Hospital sits right now. And all those buildings burned down in a fire too, except for one building that you see on the right. It's a kind of a stable-like building that is still standing, and Dr. White has it as his office now at Miles County. But all of those buildings were destroyed in a fire, and then later in the early 40s, the Walker family, at the same time that the Miles family made a very generous donation to establish a new hospital, the Walker family made a donation in kind of the land too, the combination resulting in what we know as the Miles complex right now.
in 1941.
Right.
That was before our time. We better skip right over
Let's
that.
skip right over that. There is another,
Yeah, that's the
a
same.
final look of the serene setting of Damariscotta as it was.
Let's
and
go one more picture.
one more.
That's it.
That's it.
You've all been wondering about this sign here, which Doris Pierce resurrected for me. And this is the sign for the old Newcastle Bank, which was at the corner of the Lincoln Block, right where the bookstore is now. And it was the Newcastle Bank in Damariscotta, which later merged with the First National Bank of Damariscotta in 1933. And I used to have a savings account in this bank. This is made of a screen. You can actually see through this. You may not be able to see that way, but I can see that way. So this hung in the window of that old Newcastle Bank in Damariscotta. And incidentally, the Newcastle Bank was quite solvent. The First National Bank of Damariscotta was in real difficulty at the time of the bank holiday in '33. So when it reopened, it was the merged bank of the Newcastle and First National Bank.